It was July 6, 2011 when husband and wife Brian and Marilyn Matayoshi decided to take a peaceful walk through Yellowstone National Park. They were following the Wapiti Lake Trail on the park's east side in Wyoming. The weather was clear with sunshine spilling through the trees and the air warm enough for a light jacket. The couple had brought their cameras and binoculars, eager to capture the beauty of the park. Marilyn had a small backpack with water and an extra sweater, and they paused frequently to admire the views and the wildlife. They watched birds, ospreys, falcons, and eagles perch in the trees, while the quiet flow of a nearby creek made the air feel even more serene. Around an hour and a half into their walk, they encountered another hiker who warned them of a brown bear with 2 cubs up ahead, about 500 yards along the trail. Grateful for the warning, Brian and Marilyn continued their walk, looking forward to the chance of seeing the bears from a safe distance. A short time later, they spotted the bears, 2 small cubs and their mother, a large grizzly. The cubs were playing in the meadow, their bodies tumbling through the grass, while their mother moved through the scene with a calm, steady gait. Brian and Marilyn stopped to take photos, both excited by the rare opportunity. They snapped several shots, trying to capture the peaceful family before moving on. As the mosquitoes began to swarm, they decided it was time to turn back. Just as they retraced their steps, they encountered the bears once again, but this time, the mother grizzly and her cubs were much closer, less than 100 feet away. The sight of the bear and her cubs so near the trail sent an immediate jolt of unease through the couple. They stopped, unsure of how to proceed. The mother bear, noticing them, began to move toward them. The pair were frozen in place, aware of the danger but unsure of what to do. The park's guidelines were clear: stay still, stay calm, and avoid sudden movements when a bear is near. If attacked, it was advised to lie down and protect the neck and head, but the instinct to flee was overwhelming. Before they could think it through, they turned and started running as fast as they could. The crunch of their feet against the trail was muffled by the frantic thumping of their hearts. Panic surged through them. Marilyn believed for a moment they might outrun the bear, but when she dared glance back behind her, she saw the grizzly gaining on them. The bear's speed was terrifying. They managed to run almost 200 yards, but the bear was relentless. Marilyn veered off the trail, ducking behind a fallen log, praying the bear would pass. But the mother grizzly wasn't satisfied. The bear grabbed Brian, who was still on the path they had just walked, with one powerful paw, knocking him to the ground. The blow stunned him, leaving him motionless for a moment, but it was the deep bite to his leg that caused him to scream. The bear's jaw sunk into his flesh, tearing through muscle and cutting into the femoral artery. The blood flowed quickly and Brian was unable to move. His life slipped away right there on the trail. Marilyn, helplessly watching from her hiding place, was paralyzed by fear. She lay as still as possible, face down in the dirt, her legs trembling with terror and her heart pounding in her chest. The only sounds were the bear's growls and the heavy thud of its paws through the dirt. She squeezed her eyes shut, praying the bear would not notice her. After what felt like an eternity, the bear seemed to lose interest in Brian and move away. Marilyn had held her breath, praying it would leave her alone. For a few minutes she stayed on the ground, unsure whether the danger had passed. Then, cautiously, she crept over to Brian. He lay still, his face pale, his legs soaked in blood. Marilyn's desperate attempts to revive him were futile. She pulled out her phone, but there was no signal. Frantically, she dialed 911 repeatedly, but there was nothing. In a panic, she waved the phone high in the air, hoping to reach someone. Eventually, another hiker appeared and they called for help. But by the time rescuers arrived, it was too late. Brian had died from the attack. The authorities decided not to euthanize the bear right away, but after another fatal encounter in the same area, they confirmed the same bear was responsible for both attacks. With the evidence clear, the decision was made to kill the grizzly. The 2 cubs were removed from the park and sent to a wildlife center. Marilyn, still grappling with the shock and grief, sifted through Brian's belongings and discovered his camera, filled with countless photos of the park. The last image he had captured was one of a mother grizzly and her cubs strolling peacefully through the meadow, an image that marked the final moments of serenity before everything changed. The brutal attack that followed shattered the calm of the day, leaving Marilyn to mourn the loss of her husband. The life they had built vanished in an instant, and all that remained were the photographs immortalizing a peaceful moment that would never come again. It was August 2002, a warm and pleasant afternoon in the Catskill Mountains in New York. The sun blanketed the dense forest in golden light, casting long shadows between the towering trees. The Schwimmer family, Rachel, Pincus, and their 3 children from Brooklyn, had arrived in Woodbridge, a village nestled in the heart of the Catskills, for their annual summer retreat. They had spent their vacations here for years, enjoying the peacefulness of the area and the beauty of the mountains. Woodbridge, surrounded by 700 acres of wilderness, was a place of tranquility where families could escape the noise and busyness of city life. The area was popular for hiking, cycling, and water sports, though some of the once thriving holiday cottages were now empty or in disrepair. Despite the passage of time, the Schwimmer family had always found comfort in the familiarity of the location. After lunch, Rachel Schwimmer, along with her 2 older children, took a short walk around the grounds, leaving their 5-month-old daughter Esther to nap in her stroller just outside their cottage. The older children, 4-year-old Ben and 2-year-old Sarah, played on the grassy lawn, their laughter ringing through the air as they chased one another. Unknown to Rachel, a young male black bear was nearby. The bear, likely only 2 years old, had become accustomed to the presence of humans. It had roamed the area before, scavenging for scraps of food left behind by vacationers. His presence had gone unnoticed by the family as he ventured closer to the cottages, drawn by the scent of food. The bear's nose twitched as it caught the smell of the young family. Its instincts led it toward the cottages where Esther slept, unaware of the danger that was about to unfold. This peaceful moment would soon be shattered. "Bear!" a voice shouted from one of the neighboring cottages. Rachel froze for a moment, unsure of what was happening. Then the voice came again, clearer this time. "Bear!" Panic set in as Rachel looked up and saw the bear ambling across the lawn, heading straight toward her cottage. The bear, only about 5 feet tall on its hind legs, was likely more curious than aggressive, drawn by the scent of the baby and the human food left behind. It was a young male, about 155 pounds, likely foraging for food in the area. Its behavior had become more brazen over time, likely due to humans feeding it directly or leaving food scraps around. Now it was approaching the cottage. Rachel immediately grabbed Ben and Sarah, pulling them toward the safety of the cottage. "Get inside!" she yelled, rushing them inside as the bear approached. But as she turned to race back outside for Esther, it was already too late. Rachel's heart stopped as she saw the bear knock Esther from her stroller. The baby's screams echoed across the yard, a piercing sound that chilled Rachel to her core. In one swift movement, the bear lifted Esther into its jaws, shaking her tiny body violently. Rachel's breath caught in her throat as she watched, helpless, unable to reach her daughter in time. The bear, its instincts driven by hunger and curiosity, retreated into the woods with Esther still in its mouth. Rachel and several other witnesses, including her husband Pincus, scrambled to follow. Pincus, frantic, ran after the bear, though it swiped at him with its claws, leaving him injured but undeterred. He continued his pursuit, desperate to save his daughter. The bear paused for a moment, standing its ground as rocks and stones rained down on it from nearby onlookers. Amid the chaos of shouts and screams, the bear finally released Esther and fled into the woods. It was a brief moment of hope, but the relief was short-lived. Rachel ran to her baby and sat by her side, clutching her daughter tightly as she tried to calm her cries. A few moments later, Officer Dave Decker arrived, having been called by the witnesses. He was confronted by the harrowing scene, the aftermath of the attack still raw and evident. Together, they wrapped the baby in a blanket, Rachel's hands trembling as she clung to her child. They called for an ambulance, desperately hoping for a miracle. But it was too late. On the way to the hospital, Esther succumbed to her injuries, her young life lost in an instant. By the time the ambulance arrived, the baby's screams had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. The weight of the tragedy settled over everyone present, leaving a haunting stillness in its wake. People were in shock, unable to comprehend how something so horrific had occurred in such a peaceful place. The bear, meanwhile, had not ventured far from the site of the attack. It had climbed a tree about 15 feet high, likely seeking refuge from the chaos it had caused. Police officers soon arrived and, upon finding the bear, made the decision to end its life. 5 shots rang out and the bear fell from the tree with a heavy thud. An autopsy was conducted on the bear to understand what might have led to the attack. Rabies and other diseases were ruled out, and it was found that the bear's stomach contained a mixture of woodland vegetation and human food, fruit labels, aluminum foil, and plastic bags. The bear had become accustomed to scavenging for food left behind by humans, and the sweet scent of milk and diapers likely drew it toward the Schwimmer family. Though it hadn't meant to kill Esther, the bear's curiosity had tragically turned fatal. This was the first fatal bear attack in New York in over a decade, and it was an event that stunned both the locals and wildlife experts. The bear, a young male, had not been tagged, indicating it was not a repeat offender. The attack itself was highly unusual, as black bears are generally shy and tend to avoid human contact. Experts speculated that the bear's hunger and the presence of human food in the area had made it bolder, leading to its tragic actions. The people of Woodbridge, already dealing with the shock of the event, found themselves reflecting on the consequences of human actions. The increasing frequency of bear-human encounters was linked to the rising number of bears in the area, many of which had become habituated to human food. As bears lost their fear of people, they became more likely to approach homes and cottages in search of food, which led to dangerous situations. Following Esther's death, calls for stricter bear hunting regulations intensified in nearby states, like New Jersey and Connecticut. Bear populations had been growing rapidly, and with no control measures in place, incidents like the one in Woodbridge had become increasingly likely. As grizzly bears have grown more reliant on human food sources, encounters with people have become more frequent and more dangerous. Some unintentionally offer food while others actively seek interaction, disregarding the risks. On the evening of May 4th, 2021, the dense forest of Waiparus Creek, northwest of Calgary, Alberta, were alive with the quiet stirrings of dusk. The scent of pine and damp earth lingered in the crisp mountain air, carried by a faint breeze that rustled through the boreal canopy. The last light of the sun cast golden streaks across the rugged terrain, illuminating the Ghost River Valley below. The steady trickle of water against the rocks provided a rhythmic backdrop to the wilderness, a sharp contrast to the deepening silence that settled over the trees. As night crept in, the forest seemed almost unnaturally still, an unsettling quiet broken only by the distant rustling of unseen movement in the underbrush. This was grizzly country. Dr. David Lertzman, a 59-year-old assistant professor at the University of Calgary's Ascanier School of Business, had spent his life studying and respecting the natural world. He was a dedicated environmentalist, known for his deep understanding of wilderness survival, indigenous knowledge, and sustainable development. His passion extended beyond academia. He led week-long retreats in the Kanaskaski's backcountry, guiding students through the rugged terrain to teach them how to navigate, meditate, and find their place within the environment. His work was more than just a profession, it was a calling. David and his wife Sarah Lertzman had built a life surrounded by nature in Wyporus Creek, where the wilderness began just beyond their doorstep. His daily trail runs through the nearby Ghost River Trail system were a sacred routine, moments of solitude where he could move through the landscape he cherished, soaking in the sights and sounds of Alberta's untamed beauty. But the wilderness, no matter how familiar, is never without risk. And on this night, something was waiting for him in the shadows, watching, listening, moving ever closer. Grizzly bears are the undisputed apex predators of North America's wilderness, their power unmatched in the ecosystems they dominate. Weighing between 400 and 1,000 pounds and standing up to 9 feet tall, these monstrous creatures command their territory with instinct-driven precision. Though primarily omnivorous, feeding on berries, roots, and small mammals, grizzlies are territorial animals, aggressive when defending cubs or food sources. Unlike black bears, grizzlies do not flee or climb trees when threatened. They hold their ground, charge, and if necessary, attack. Their bite force, nearly 1,200 pounds per square inch, can crush bone with ease, and their claws, reaching up to 4 inches long, make them lethal in close combat. Most encounters between humans and grizzlies end without conflict. The bears retreat, the hikers move on. But sometimes a single misstep can turn a peaceful moment into a deadly confrontation. At 6 p.m., David left home for his evening run, choosing the Moss Trail, a rugged mountain path with steep inclines and dense forest, winding through the boreal wilderness of Wyporus. The familiar rhythm of his footsteps echoed along the dirt trail as he ascended toward a high embankment, where the land plunged sharply into a vast, rugged wilderness. The sheer drops stretched hundreds of feet below him, the trees at the base appearing as tiny, swaying specks in the fading light. He slowed as he reached the edge, wiping the sweat from his brow and peering down at the dizzying height that made the world beneath him seem impossibly distant. Far below, the twinkling lights of Calgary flickered like scattered stars, a faint reminder of the world he had momentarily left behind. But something else was there. A female grizzly bear, possibly with a cub nearby, had been feeding just beyond the embankment. She had heard him before he had even reached the clearing. The sound of his footfalls, the scent of sweat in the breeze, it was enough to trigger her instinct to defend. Unlike most bears that retreat at human presence, this one did not run. She remained still, crouched in the brush, muscles tense beneath her thick fur. Then, in a flash of movement, she charged. David never saw her coming. The impact hit him from behind with immense force, sending him plunging forward off the embankment. His feet slipped on the loose dirt, arms flailing as he pitched over the edge, the world spinning violently around him. With the bear remaining on the trail above, David tumbled 900 feet down the rocky slope, his body colliding with jagged rock, fallen trees, and sheer cliffside before landing near the Ghost River below. He had no chance to recover, no chance to fight back. By the time he reached the bottom, he was gone. Back at home, Sarah paced anxiously. David was never late. His runs typically lasted an hour at most, but now 4 had passed. Around 10 p.m., she called his phone, but there was no answer. Something was wrong. Grabbing a flashlight, she left the house alone, retracing the route she knew so well. The forest loomed around her, impossibly dark and silent. She called his name, her voice swallowed by the night. Unbeknownst to her, she was standing on the cliff above him, searching desperately for a man who was already gone. By midnight, she called Cochrane Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Within 2 hours, a full-scale search was launched. A helicopter with a spotlight, search dogs, and rescue teams combed the area, retracing his likely path. Just after 2 a.m., the light from the helicopter illuminated the lifeless body below. David had fallen nearly 900 feet, suffering instantaneous fatal injuries on impact. An autopsy later confirmed what officials already suspected. He had not been mauled or consumed. This was not a predatory attack. The bear had reacted out of defense, a split-second act of territorial aggression that had sent him to his death. Wildlife officers immediately set baited traps along the trail, hoping to locate the bear responsible, but weeks passed with no sign of her. Eventually, to prevent attracting other large predators, the traps were removed, and the trail was reopened to the public. The University of Calgary community was devastated. Dr. Jim DeWall, dean of the Haas-Gagné School of Business, described David as a friend to all, a spiritual leader, and an inspiration to thousands of students. His legacy was one of environmental stewardship, deep respect for indigenous knowledge, and a lifelong dedication to sustainability. On May 6, 2021, the university lowered its flag in his honor. For Sarah, the grief was impossible to accept. She had been so close, calling his name in the darkness, unaware that he had already taken his last breath. She had searched the trails, not knowing she had stood above the place where he had fallen. The knowledge would stay with her forever. David spent his life teaching others how to connect with nature, how to respect it, understand it, and move within it safely. But in the end, it was nature that took him. It was June 19, 2017, when Aaron Johnson, 27, was assigned to work at Pogo Mine, located 90 miles east of Fairbanks in the rugged Alaskan wilderness. An experienced field technician with Alaska Biological Research, Aaron had spent years immersed in the outdoors, applying her studies in geology and botany to the wild landscape around her. It was the kind of work she had always dreamed of, a blend of adventure and science. The day had started like any other, with Aaron and her colleague, 38-year-old Ellen Traynor, being dropped off by helicopter to begin their field work. The Pogo Mine, a gold mine with ties to both Japanese and Australian companies, was situated in bear country, an environment where safety precautions were paramount. All employees, including Aaron and Ellen, had undergone bear safety training, learning how to use bear spray effectively and the option to carry rifles into the field. On this day, 6 employees were assigned to various sites, paired for safety, with Aaron and Ellen working together. The duo had been briefed and equipped, aware of the potential dangers but determined to complete their tasks. They were collecting geological samples along a transect, detailed work that required precision. The women crouched low to the ground, documenting the soil structure, vegetation, and pH, absorbed in their task. The forest around them was thick, the sounds of the wilderness humming softly as they worked, unaware of the danger closing in on them. A male black bear, hungry and on the prowl, had been tracking them from a distance. The bear, using the wind to its advantage, had crept closer and closer, its eyes locked on the 2 women. It was only when Aaron and Ellen looked up, their eyes meeting the bear's, that they realized the danger they were in. The predator was no longer hiding. Its immense presence was impossible to ignore. In that moment of realization, the 2 women instinctively reached for their bear spray. But before they could even use it, the bear surged forward with terrifying speed. It covered the distance between them in an instant, its claws raking Aaron's body as it knocked her to the ground. Ellen, desperate to protect her colleague, sprayed the bear in the face. But the bear was undeterred, its aggression only intensifying. Aaron was pinned beneath the bear, helpless as the animal bit and clawed at her, its immense strength rendering her powerless. Ellen continued to spray, shouting, attempting to distract the bear long enough for Aaron to escape. But the bear turned on Ellen, attacking her just as ferociously as it had attacked Aaron. The struggle was brutal, a blur of claws, teeth, and desperate cries for help. Despite their best efforts, the bear seemed impervious to their resistance. It wasn't retreating as most bears would do when confronted with a threat. Instead, it was intent on its attack, its eyes locked on its prey. The two women fought back, but the bear's strength and determination were overwhelming. It seemed there was no escape. The bear finally retreated, its hunger momentarily sated. Ellen, dazed and disoriented, managed to call for help over the radio, transmitting a mayday alert. The male pilot of a nearby helicopter, having heard the distress call, quickly altered course. The helicopter, just 5 miles away from the mine, rapidly closed the distance. Ellen lay motionless, barely aware of the whirling blades above as the helicopter descended. The winch was lowered and Ellen was lifted into the air, her body limp and unresponsive. As she was hauled up to safety, the pilot turned the helicopter back toward the mine. Ellen was soon transported by ambulance to the hospital in Fairbanks, but Aaron was nowhere to be seen. The helicopter returned to the site and a Pogo mine employee was lowered to search for Aaron. He found clear signs of the struggle: blood, scattered equipment, and flattened vegetation, but no trace of Aaron. Determined, he followed a blood trail through the dense forest. After a short distance, he spotted the bear standing over Aaron's body just 30 feet from the last sign of struggle. Without hesitation, the employee raised his rifle and fired, killing the bear. But it was too late. Aaron had succumbed to her injuries. The vibrant young woman who had dedicated her life to the outdoors, who had married her best friend just weeks earlier, was gone. Her death was a devastating loss, not only for her family and friends, but for the entire community. Ellen, severely injured, was transported to the hospital in Fairbanks where she would recover from her injuries, though she would never forget the brutality of the attack. The Department of Fish and Game launched an investigation confirming that this was a predatory bear attack, an extremely rare and deadly occurrence. It was determined that the bear had stalked them for nearly 15 minutes before the attack, slowly closing the gap behind them and using the forest to stay hidden. News of the attack spread quickly and fear began to sweep through the Alaskan communities. The incident was the second fatal bear mauling in the state within the same week. Concerns mounted. Were bears now seeing humans as prey? Were these rare attacks becoming more common? The Alaska Department of Fish and Game issued warnings urging people to carry bear spray and stay vigilant in the wilderness. But the tragic reality was clear. No amount of preparation or safety equipment could guarantee survival in the face of such a determined predator. Aaron's death, though part of a rare and deadly pattern, would forever be remembered as a haunting reminder of the dangers lurking in the wild. Aaron Johnson's life had been one of passion, adventure, and dedication to the natural world. Her untimely death in the Alaskan wilderness was a sobering reminder of nature's indifference and the unpredictable dangers it holds. It was a chilled Saturday morning in Chateau, Montana. The clock had just struck 8, and the overcast sky stretched endlessly, laden with thick gray clouds. Chateau's green landscapes, renowned for their wildlife and agricultural history, now lay veiled beneath the snow and mist of early October. The temperature hovered near freezing, and the biting wind carried with it the weight of an impending storm. Visibility was limited to about 15 feet, with every breath forming a fleeting cloud in the icy air. In this unforgiving weather, 26-year-old Chase Delwo and his older brother Shane, 30, prepared for the day's hunt. Raised on a family ranch in Blackleaf, they were no strangers to the challenges of big game hunting. Armed with their preferred bows, the brothers ventured westward to the rugged terrain near Bynum, determined to bring down an elk. The area, a haven for wildlife, was home to creatures like mule deer, moose, wolves, and the formidable grizzly bear. This wealth of biodiversity also made it a prime hunting ground. Shane, experienced and meticulous, had devised a plan that split their efforts. He climbed a ridge to gain a vantage point overlooking a creek bed, while Chase worked below, intent on driving the elk herd toward his brother. Though their strategy was sound, the worsening weather posed an undeniable challenge. As Chase moved along the creek bed, the snowfall thickened and a frigid rain began to fall. His boots crunched against the sodden grass, the sound muffled by the relentless storm. Despite the conditions, Chase remained determined, his thoughts focused on the prospect of a successful hunt. Suddenly, a distant sound broke through the droning rhythm of the falling snow, the bugle of a bull elk. It was faint but unmistakable, the sound of their quarry. Chase froze, straining to pinpoint the direction. The snow and rain muddled his senses, but his instincts urged him onward. The terrain became more rugged, the soft grass giving way to uneven rocky ground. As Chase advanced, he caught a scent on the wind, sharp and musky. It stirred a distant memory, sending a chill down his spine. He paused, scanning the limited horizon. The feeling of being watched crept over him, and his grip on the bow tightened. Without warning, the silence shattered. A massive grizzly bear erupted from the underbrush, its roar reverberating through the creek bed. The bear stood on its hind legs, towering over Chase at nearly 10 feet tall, its dense fur matted with moisture. Its black eyes locked onto him with an intensity that froze him in place. Before Chase could react, the bear charged, slamming into him with tremendous force. His bow flew from his grasp as he was driven to the ground. The bear's jaws clamped onto Chase's skull, its teeth piercing through flesh and bone. The pain was excruciating, but adrenaline surged through him, sharpening his focus. The bear released him momentarily, its guttural roar a terrifying proclamation of dominance. Pinned beneath the creature's massive paws, Chase's survival instincts took over. He recalled a technique he had read about years ago. An animal's gag reflex could be triggered by targeting the soft palate. As the bear lunged again, Chase thrust his arm into its throat with all the strength he could muster. The bear recoiled, coughing and gagging, its confusion granting Chase a fleeting chance. Bleeding and battered, he scrambled to his feet, each step a desperate push toward the ridge where Shane waited. His boots slipped on the wet, uneven ground, but he pushed forward, his vision blurred by blood and sweat. From his vantage point, Shane spotted Chase's staggering form through the mist and initially mistook it for a signal of triumph. But as his brother drew closer, Shane's stomach sank. Chase's camouflage hunting gear was in tatters, his face a gruesome mask of blood and mud, and his left eye swollen shut. Shane abandoned his position and rushed to meet his brother midway. Chase's injuries were severe. His clothes were soaked, clinging to him in the freezing air, and blood pooled from multiple wounds. Shane quickly applied makeshift bandages to staunch the bleeding and supported Chase as they made their way to the truck. The storm raged around them, snow and rain obscuring their path, but Shane's focus remained unshaken. Each step was accompanied by the squelch of waterlogged boots and the howl of the wind. The drive to Benefice Teton Medical Center in Chateau was a blur of urgency. Shane gripped the wheel tightly, his foot pressed hard against the accelerator. The truck's engine roared as it sped down the empty highway, the tires kicking up slush and mud. The faint smell of burning rubber mixed with the storm's icy bite. Chase drifted in and out of consciousness, his breath shallow and labored. Shane kept speaking to him, urging him to stay awake, his voice strained with worry. By the time they reached the emergency room, Chase was barely responsive. Medical staff acted swiftly, their calm efficiency a stark contrast to the chaos of the past few hours. The antiseptic smell of the hospital mingled with the lingering odor of blood and rain. After an exhaustive surgery lasting over 5 hours, Chase's body was a patchwork of stitches and bandages. The ordeal had left him scarred but alive. Later, when asked about the encounter, Chase offered a simple reflection. Respect nature. If you don't, it may just remind you who's in charge.